and welcome to our crystal challenge. We're running a BERNINA crystal challenge through classic quilts, and this is the pattern that we're going to be making. It is a traditional foundation paper piecing pattern. You'll find a link to this on the website, and you can click download your free pattern, and we're going to do a short quick tutorial on how to do foundation paper piecing to make this crystal block. What the challenge is all about is BERNINA is releasing their crystal edition sewing machine, and it is really exciting. So the challenge for you is to make a mini quilt with the theme of a crystal. You don't have to use this block. You can create your own design, your own mini quilt. You can do any other pattern that you have that represents a crystal to you, or do a little whole cloth mini quilt and bling it up with crystals. The choice is yours. The options are endless. If you go over to Classic Quilts and register for the challenge and download your free pattern, whether you make it or not, your downloading of the free pattern is your entry into the challenge. You can always just put the pattern away for another time if you don't want to do it. But for today, I thought it would be fun that we can take you step by step through foundation paper piecing this crystal block. For foundation paper piecing, and first of all, let's explain what foundation paper piecing is. Essentially, we will be building our block at the back of this pattern, and we will be stitching on these lines. And it sounds a bit crazy, but we'll take you through step by step. Once you get the hang of it, it's pretty easy to do. A few things that we need. You need your pattern. And on the pattern, it explains that you need your fabric requirements. This is enough to probably make 2 or 3 blocks. It's a 10-inch square of 5 shades of gray or blue, or any other crystal color you choose, and a 1/4 yard of background fabric. 2 other useful things. This is called an add a 1/4 ruler, and what it is it's a ruler that has a lip on the bottom, and I'm not sure if you can see that, but if I slide this here, you can see it stops there on this lip, and we have a 1/4 inch protruding from there, and I will show you as we go along how this is useful to your foundation paper piecing. And what this is just a piece of cardboard. Why we use this is when we start, we're going to be folding and bending our paper, and it's really easy to do if you have a nice piece of cardboard. Okay, so step 1 is we're going to trim our pattern. Now you can see you have solid lines and there's dotted lines. We're going to trim our pattern away from the dotted line, so you still have at least a 1/4 inch away from the dotted line. We'll first start by taking off our directions, and what I use for this kind of work is an old rotary with my old blades. Because you're cutting one layer of fabric, old blades work, but it doesn't dull a new blade when you're cutting through paper and fabric. So here's your instructions, keep that. And now we're gonna you can see we've got a 1/4 inch away from the dotted line, more or less. It doesn't have to be precise, but we're just trimming down the excess from our pattern. And that just makes it easier when you're working. You don't have as much bulk of the paper around the outside. Okay, so now we've got template A, and now we're going to do the same thing for template B. This is a lovely opportunity for you to raid your scrap bin for the different shades of colors and things like that you want to do. You don't have to have the exact pieces, as long as when you're choosing a piece, you can see I've got all my little scraps here ready to go. This will be my background, and I'm doing shades of gray for this one. So I've got a whole bunch. That's too dark, so we'll put that aside. And we've got all of these, and what you're looking for is that the piece is bigger than the shape, and you can see clearly that one's not bigger, but it is bigger than these, so we can put those pieces with the small one, right? And that's basically how you'll divide up your scraps. You'll just take the shades, these are all light grays, and we just find something, let's see, Now that would work on one of those, so we can keep it here for the bigger side. And there's another one that might work. And this is how we do it. Here's a nice one that can work there. And resort it for the big one, because these sides would be your background. So you can see here, according to your instructions, we're going to work from left to right. We're going to put a background piece, a gray, a gray, a gray, and a background. And over here, we're going to do a background, a gray, 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 background. And that's how you're going to build it out. So as long as your fabric is larger than the piece you're going to be covering, you know that it will work. Okay, so when you sit down at your machine and you switch it on and you're going to your regular sewing, your setup will be 2.5, which is standard on your BERNINA, right? Over here is where you're going to adjust stitch width and stitch length. And because we're stitching in a straight stitch, there's no need to adjust the width. So what we're going to do is adjust the stitch length. When you're doing foundation paper piecing, you want to make it smaller. And you can see it turns yellow as soon as it's off the standard setting. And we're going to go all the way down to 1.5. And 1.5 will give you a very tiny stitch, which will help perforate the paper, but also secure your piecing. And that's all you need to do with the setup. The rest, your tension, everything else, all the adjustments, BERNINA takes care of all of that automatically. That's why we have one of these beautiful machines. Okay, I'm going to be stitching with my regular number 97D foot. And why I'm choosing this foot is I can clearly see the line that I'm stitching through this gap. It is my 1/4 inch for when I'm not stitching on paper, and it's got a dual feed. So if you've got your BERNINA and you have your dual feed, what you do is you engage your dual feed by bringing it down from the back and hooking it on there. And what this does is it feeds your paper and your fabric evenly. So it grabs from the top and the bottom and it pulls. And that way you're not just feeding the bottom where the top tends to slip and slide. Essentially, it's like a really neat version of a dual foot. What is it called, Ash?
A walking foot.
A walking foot, that's it. You see, I don't need it because I've got a dual foot. Never needed a walking foot with a BERNINA.
Yeah, I thought that'd be like the silent spectator, but
no.
Now I did the video.
And now to set up for your paper piecing template, we're going to take our cardboard and you're going to go onto your first line where it goes background to G1. And you're going to lay your cardstock right on that line. And you're going to tilt up and give a really nice crease along your cardboard all the way across. And now you're going to do the same thing between G1 and G2. And you're going to give a really nice crease. And you're going to repeat this for both templates. So you're going to crease all of these, and then you're going to crease between G1 and between background and G2, 3, and 4. There's no need to crease your outside edge. You're just creasing your stitching lines, which are these in between, right? And I'll meet you back here and we'll be ready to start. Okay, the hardest part about foundation paper piecing is starting, because you have to wrap your head around the fact that you're working upside down. You will be stitching on the top of the paper, but you'll be putting your fabrics underneath the paper. But once you get started, it becomes a system of work this side all the time. And to get started, we're going to turn our paper. We know we're going to be doing this unit first, which is your background fabric, and we're going to be stitching on this fold. So when you flip over, here's the first fold that we're stitching on to do the background fabric, which goes here. And we make sure that our fabric piece fits and extends over. And this is our stitch line, so we need to put our fabric just a bit beyond to start. And there we go. When we put our fabric down, you need to put it right sides facing you, with the wrong side facing the wrong side of your paper. And that is the right way to do it. That's a tongue twister. And now we're going to place first our background fabric, and then we know that our first triangle is going to sit here. So you make sure your fabric is larger than that first triangle, and we're going to place it right sides together with our background fabric. So again, we have our two fabrics right sides together, and those two fabrics are wrong sides with the wrong side of the paper. If you can start like this, the rest of it will be easy. We're going to pop a pin in, making sure that the pin doesn't go anywhere near where we will be stitching. And we're going to turn it over. Okay. Now we want to have this a 1/4 inch away from our stitch line, and that's where this ruler comes in. Remember, I told you it's got this lip. If we fold our paper back, right, you've got this fold over here. We only want a 1/4 inch of fabric in this area, and when you put your ruler here and you butt it up against your paper, that lip catches perfectly on your paper. And I just want to grab my rotary cutter, and now we can just trim off the excess. Now remember, I told you I use my old blades for this, so sometimes you have to trim once or twice, but it's worth it for not ruining a new blade. Now when we pull our paper over, we have a perfect 1/4 inch here, and we're going to be stitching on this line. Okay, so let's go and do our first stitch so you can see more or less what we're doing. Okay, I don't know if your Bernina's got a knee lift, but if you can see what I'm doing here, I have the knee lift installed, and as I put my presser foot down, I can adjust my paper by just slightly lifting up with the knee lift. And I'm going to start stitching about 1 or 2 stitches away from the solid line and extend 1 or 2 stitches past it so that I can perfectly line up on that line. And here we stitch. Take your time, stitch on the line, and you'll have a perfectly accurate block. 1 stitch and cut, which will give you your second stitch. Okay, and here we are. Now we're going to flip back to the other side. Remember, I told you it's a lot of working this side then that side. Open your fabric, and we're going to use a roller. You can press it, but I find that building a block like this, going backwards and forwards to the iron all the time, becomes a bit of a pain, so I prefer to use a seam roller. And now we're going to be stitching on the line between G1 and G2. Okay, so this is our new stitch line, which means we're going to fold back, and we need to trim off all this excess. So again, we're going to take our add a 1/4 ruler, and we're going to throw that away. I keep a little trash can next to me. And when we fold back, this will be our stitch line, but first we need to place our next piece, which we know is going to be another gray piece, and that we're placing here because we're going to be working in this section. And put it on that line, pop your pin in away from where you're working, okay, and turn it over. And this becomes a sequence as you're doing your block, step by step on each side. And cut your thread. And what do? Turn it over, remove your pin, and open up. Now looking at this block now, if you're used to only traditional piecing, it looks like a hot mess. But trust me, by the time you've finished building this out and we trim it to size, it's going to be beautiful. And now we flip back over, and where do we go now? Between 2 and 3, this will be our new stitching line. So we fold that back, and now we're going to cut all that excess off.
That's Bronwyn's parrot.
We're lucky no bad words are coming out at the moment, but I'm waiting for them.
Just saying hello and whimpering. I thought that was one of your dogs.
No,
It's your parrot.
the parrot barks like a dog too.
That's our entertainment, guys.
Oh, I forgot to put a pin, see? She's distracting me with the parrot.
Sorry, guys.
It's okay.
Oh, I'm the distraction.
Not the parrot. I'm just waiting for Aisha's reaction when the parrot swears at her.
Really hoping that doesn't happen while we're doing the video.
Really? Look at me make a mistake. Aish.
Okay. Okay, guys, what do we do? We're going to stitch on the wrong side?
No, I was going to stitch on the wrong side with a
wrong
1/4
side,
inch.
yeah, okay, sorry.
Okay,
Back
let's
to
stitch
it,
on the
back
line,
to
back
it.
on the line, and here we go for it. It's all fun, right? Open up, and now we're going to trim the next one between number 3 and 4. When you stitch beyond and there's always these little bits, it's okay to just give a little tug on it and to break your paper in that area, because remember, you've stitched beyond your pattern. And now we're going to just use our add a 1/4 and cut. Fold it back, and we place our next grey piece, put a pin, and stitch. And this is how you're going to continue for the whole block. We're going to do this one together so that you can see how it ends. Okay. I always think to myself, like, is this actually right? I always question it. Is it right? Because it just looks so messy. And then it's only when you're finished and you trim it that you realize, like, hey, I made something pretty. Okay. So you'll notice every time I finish cutting, I always close my rotary. Some people will be tempted when you're using it so often just to leave it clipped out. But for your own personal safety and for the sake of keeping all 10 toes, please always close it. Because if this falls off, it's going to land with a sharp blade against something of yours. And that's not a pleasant place to be in the emergency room with one toe cut. So always close your rotary. I'll tell you a story while I'm busy sewing. When I first started quilting, I knew nothing. And I bought myself a rotary. And I bought myself a mat, but I didn't know I had to have a special ruler. So I bought one long wooden yardstick and I tried to cut my fabric. Needless to say, my brand new rotary slid off the yardstick and cut off the whole tip into my finger, into my nail, and I had to end up in the emergency room my very first time trying to make a quilting project. So I've had the greatest respect for a rotary blade ever since that day. And appreciation for quilting rulers. And in the trash. And now remember, don't get too excited with your grays. This very last piece needs to be a background piece. So we're going to flip it over, and here's our background piece. Put the pin in, and we're nearly there. Okay, push this back. Give it a roll, and now what you'll see is we have a dotted line a 1/4 inch away from this solid line, and you can decide if you want to use a 1/4 inch marking on your ruler or if you want to follow the dotted line. Either way is perfect, but we're going to be trimming a 1/4 inch away from the solid line. So essentially cutting on that dotted line. A rotating cutting mat is really good for this, and I usually use that, but to show you, we're doing it here at the machine, and now this is where the magic happens. Look at that. You have perfect piecing, with a perfect 1/4 inch. If you see here from your point to your end, there's a perfect spacing. Everything about foundation paper piecing comes out perfect, and that hot mess that you saw is now a perfect block. How fun is that? We're going to repeat the same process on this one, bearing in mind that it is bigger, but you're going to start with a background fabric, a grey, 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 and a background, and trim that to your 1/4 inch around. And then once we've done that, we'll meet back here and I will show you the next step to making your block. Okay, our next step is joining our piece A and our piece B. Now we've still got our paper on the back of all of these, and that's what we're going to use to be able to match up our points. It's not vital if you're off a bit, don't worry about it, but this will get you as close to perfect points as possible. So what we're going to do, remember when you're joining it, you want your background pieces to be up at the top on your top piece, and your background pieces to be at the bottom of your bottom piece. And then you know you're putting your crystal together properly. And now we're going to put it pretty sides together, and you're going to use some pins, and this is what we call a 3-pin technique. We're going to put a pin right in this cross section, right, which means when it comes out, it needs to come out exactly it's very important that you make sure that your pin is coming out exactly at that point. Okay, and now we're going to find this cross section. Our pin is coming out exactly there where our lines cross, and if you see from the front, it's a little bit tricky to show you, but from the front it's going in exactly between those 2 points. And now you're going to push your pin to the end, but you're not going to tuck it in like you would normally. You're just going to push it through to the end and let it sit there. And we're going to repeat the same process on these other points, right? So we'll start this one. We're going to put it through these crosshairs, making sure that it's coming out exactly there. And I just pulled that one out. This does happen, but luckily we've still got our holes, so let's check. There we go. And now we're going to put it in here, find our crosshair. There we go. Can you see? We're in there. Over here, you're between your 2 fabrics, and here you're on your crosshair. Okay. So can you see how we've got that? There is going to be bulk in these seams. Don't worry about that. It'll all quilt out. But what we're going to do now is we're going to pin in the middle here. We're going to put a pin in the middle between these 2. Okay, and now we're going to put a pin, and we're going to do our crosshairs here and here. Take your time on this step. It is worth taking that extra. This isn't going to guarantee absolute perfect points, but it's the best way to get the closest to a perfect point. Okay, and we're going to hang our pin there, and now we're going to pop a pin in between here. Okay, can you see we've now secured there and there? Okay, so we can take this pin out, and now we're going to secure here on this end. Find your crosshair, make sure it's coming out exactly there. That's just a bit too high. Let's see. There we go. And now we're going to find our crosshair here and come out. It's a little bit of poking, but it works. There we go. And we found our crosshairs, and now we're going to put our pin in. And now we can take this pin out. Okay, I'm going to pop a pin here for the beginning, and I'm going to pop a pin here for the ending. Okay, and now we can take these out. At this point you're going to make sure you don't have any more hanging pins, and now we're going to start sewing. Okay, we don't need to have it on the short stitch length anymore. Actually we do, sorry. Just for this last one we need the short stitch length. Okay, remove the pin before you stitch over it. One really nice thing about stitching with the paper still on is it prevents these bias edges from stretching while you're busy sewing. Okay, and the final stretch. Okay, now we're going to check. And that's as close to perfect as we can get it. I'm happy with that. Now we're going to remove these papers. Okay, bend it back and just give it a little tug. Because we've used such a short stitch length, the papers come off easily. And now we're going to take this one and we're going to bend that back. And now it's just a matter of tug and toss. Tug and toss. It's a little bit messy, fun to do in front of the TV, or if you have kids at home, bribe them, get them to pull off your papers. It's not so bad when you're only working on one block. If you do a whole quilt with foundation paper piecing, I do suggest remove your papers as you go block by block, otherwise you may end up putting that quilt into the never to finish pile because you don't want to pull all the papers out.
You can use foundation paper if you're doing a bigger quilt, I think.
Oh yeah, foundation papers come out like a breeze, like you just blow on them and they come out. I didn't use it on this one because I just printed straight onto the printer paper.
But it's small, so it's okay.
Exactly, it's just one. If I was doing more, or if I was doing a more intricate piece, I would definitely use foundation paper piece.
Actually, you can see she's got foundation paper.
Yeah.
Here. That's foundation paper.
The difference between it is this is a lot thinner, it perforates easier, and it tears off like super easy. There's one other way where you can do this, but then you have to, instead of printing your pattern, you use your light box and you transfer onto a very lightweight sew-in interfacing, and then you don't pull anything out, you just leave that in, and it just adds an extra layer to your quilt. I've never tried that myself though. And we're nearly there. The last step is, once we've got all these papers out, we're going to press this block and then add a small border. The border is cut at 2 inches, and that gives you about 2 1/4 when it's sewn, but after quilting it gives you that little bit of extra space to trim and square up if you need to. And obviously, being your own block, you could make your border bigger. That's really your choice, but for the pattern we've written it for a 2 inch. I'm going to, while I'm here, I'm just going to finger press this open. This is the only seam, because there's a lot of bulk in these areas, I'm going to open the seam. So I'm going to finger press it first, so that when I get to the iron it's ready to just press. So the one thing you've got to remember with foundation piecing is your fabrics are not necessarily sewn on grain. You can assume that all your pieces will be bias, which means they can stretch easily. Even once they're sewn into a block, it can distort. So my advice to you is don't put steam anywhere near this block until you've got a border on it, because steam can distort a bias piece. So we're going to use a dry iron, and we're just going to press this block from the back first and then from the front, and then we'll add the border. Okay, so because we finger pressed this, we just need to put our iron down. Okay, There's no pushing required. You don't want to distort this block. You want to be as careful as possible. You see, I'm picking up the iron, drop the iron, pick up the iron, drop the iron. The minute you start doing this is when you're going to distort your block with any piecing. So if you want to try and aim for accurate piecing, one of the biggest mistakes that prevent a nice accurate block is pushing on your fabrics when you press. It's deceptive because if I do this, it looks like I'm dragging it, but I'm actually lifting it very lightly and then dropping it down. And that's why a lot of people think that you're supposed to push. Don't do it. Okay, and look at how pretty that block is looking. Now we have our 2-inch border pieces, and I'm going to, this is cut 2 inches by width of fabric, and it's just folded in quarters, and that gives me the 4 pieces. Okay, there we go. So I'm going to start by attaching to the top and the bottom. Okay, and then once that's on and pressed open, I will then attach to the 2 sides like so. Okay, let's do this at the machine. So when you're attaching a border to something, it's very important that you have your border piece cut perfectly to your quilt or your block or whatever it is that you're building it to. So on a big quilt you would measure and then cut your borders. On a small piece like this, I'm laying it out that it's flush there and get it flush there and trim that to size. Now when I attach this, I'm going to first pin the 2 outside edges in the center. On a big piece I would add more pins. On this I think that's more than enough. Do both of these and we're going to press out. So come with, and there you have it, a really pretty crystal block. Now this is the gray colorway, and here we have a blue colorway. You could do it in yellows, pinks, anything. The only suggestion for color that I would suggest is stick with lighter shades of whichever color you're doing. So you can see I've used light grays, light blues, and you can do it on a dark background or a light background. That choice is yours. Have fun.